I'm just going to talk about a small portion of UX, and it's about something really cool. It's inclusiveness. And you may have heard of inclusive design talked about in different ways. Universal design, accessibility, universal access, all those sorts of terms are basically saying that your audience is made up of a lot of different qualities, and maybe you're not addressing enough of them. So if we were to talk about inclusive design, we might say that these people have kind of missed the mark. So how easy is it to get into their shop? Not really. Here's another one. Now, I know some athletes who might give that a try going in, but I wouldn't want to be them coming out. No. Here's another one. It gets better. At least there's grass at the bottom. And this definitely is a disabled toilet. But the little box in front of it, it has wheels, so you might be able to pull it out of your way as you try and get in there. Again, no, that's a bit of a fail. So I'd like to talk about some of the benefits of inclusive design. For your audience, it means you've decided to include people with a disability in your plans. For them, it means you've included seniors in your audience. The largest number of people who do have disabilities tend to be in the seniors. Obviously, you get a bit older, you get slower, your eyesight starts to fail. I brought my glasses because I can't see any of you up there. It also accepts temporary conditions. If you've ever been tired, if you've ever tried to use your laptop on a really sunny day and your screen is dimmed, so that's a reduced contrast. Have you ever tried to listen to something in a crowd, or your laptop's not necessarily got great speakers? So you want to include all of those conditions. For you, it improves SEO and usability. That means people are going to enjoy your site a lot better. And happier users means more visitors, means more referrals, and means more traffic coming through your site. I'd like to show some examples of inclusive design that aren't web, because they might help you think about people accessing your site. And if anyone's familiar with these are some OXO, I think they're called Sure Grip measuring cups. And they were built specifically for people with disabilities, but not only for people with disabilities. And that's why it's inclusive, that's why it's universal. So the grips are easy to use. But the really cool thing is that you can see the measurements from the top. So if you've ever tried to pour a liter of liquid and you've had to hold it up and pour it while you're looking at it from eye level, or bend down and look at it from the counter, it's really difficult. So this, you can just stand there, look down, and go ahead and pour. So that's really inclusive. You've seen these. Now, they weren't built for people who are sighted. They weren't built for people who can hear clearly. But we benefit from it as well. We're at the crossing, and we can hear and we can see that the signals have changed. So this benefits more than just the people that they were designed for. And again, this is a light rail transport. I think it's in Brazil, but it was specifically built for wheelchairs, but it isn't only used by people with wheelchairs. If you've broken your leg and you want to use public transport, obviously you can see how this is going to help you. So that's a win as well. And blind people like to drink wine too. So Chateauneuf de Pep said, why don't we print them in Braille so that they can benefit from it. So there's a win. This might take a second to, oh, one more, there we go. Here's a popular electronics website. And this is what it looks like when you turn the images off. So they obviously are interested in you. I've hacked it a bit, and I've revealed some of the hidden tags. But if you look carefully, it doesn't give you any prices, and it's not very clear. And I don't know, you might guess who it is. There you go, now you can see. Now, obviously, there's going to be products that they sell that they are missing out some traffic on because they're not revealing enough information for their audience. Accessibility is the law. Here's a list of companies who've lost anywhere between $20,000 to $6 million defending themselves against people who've been trying to use their website. I don't know if you're familiar with Sydney 2000, but a blind woman tried to book online and couldn't. More recently, it was, I'm trying to remember, Target settled out of court for $6 million because they knew they were going to lose. And that one was merely someone wanted to use a coupon for the store. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability says something very important, and I've highlighted it here. That's my underline. It's not a matter of discretion. In other words, you can't say, well, people with low vision don't come to my site, so I have no need to cater for them. It's not the case. The UN disagrees with you, and Australia, as a signatory, disagrees with you. 1 in 5 Australians has a disability. We saw a few moments ago, what was it, 15% of the internet users of the World Wide Web is hosted on WordPress. This is 20%. And here's just some examples of disabilities, but I don't really want to go too much into detail with that. We want to know, how do you get inclusive? Well, I can't do that in 15 minutes. I've led courses that I've gone for days, but there's a few things that you can do that are easy, and there's some quick wins. And at the end, I've got quite a large number of lists that we can go through. A large number of links that I'm happy to share with you later. The first resource should always be WCAG 2. It stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. WCAG is easier to remember. Version 2.0, so you can say you're talking about Web 2.0. WCAG or WCAG 1 was a bit complex. It was a bit hard for people to understand, so they spent a lot of effort making this understandable. And so they've made, so there's basically 4 main points. A website has to be perceivable, it has to be operable, it has to be understandable, and it has to be robust. This is a grab of the WCAG 2 guidelines page. It's a very long list. You don't have to look at it all the time. You don't have to look at the entire list. Here's a snippet, and I've just chosen one section here. So the guidelines have 4 principles, 12 guidelines, and 61 testable criteria. But you don't need to address all of them. It deals with it in 3 levels. Think of it as like a silver, gold, and a platinum standard. So there's level A, level AA, and level AAA. If you can start on AA, you're well on the road to at least reducing your level of exposure to not being inclusive. So each section starts with the principle. There's the guideline, which is a sort of overarching idea of the section, and then a testable criteria. And if you look over on the other side, there's links, how do I meet it? It gives you an example of failure. It gives you an example of success. It gives you technical guidance on how to actually achieve that. And I just wanted to highlight that, just showing that one guideline there is a level A guideline. Now that list might be a little bit hard to digest, so here's a map that's probably a bit of a better view. This is downloadable. Some colleagues at Stanford have created it. And it is also a clickable map. So all of those circles that you see there are clickable to that section in the WCAG guidelines. So you can keep that as a handy PDF on your desktop and just use that as your jump point for a reference.
Where do you find that?
See me later. I'll have a whole list of downloads. And but if you Google WCAG 2.0 map, I think it should still link you to the download from Stanford. But if not, I'm happy to share it. Right, let's get cracking. First thing you need to remember is design with semantic structure. What does your site look like with CSS styles turned off? Does it still make sense? Is the reading order logical? Have you got a body at the top? Have you got an H1? Are you using strong and emphasis to be as a visual cue, or are you using it as code? All of HTML is semantic. So you really want to make sure that you're using the semantic portion of HTML. And most importantly, at the very top, have a skip to content. Just have an anchor tag on your main section and a skip to content link so that people who use assistive technologies don't have to hear your entire navigation system as they move through your site. They can just jump straight into the content. So here's just a basic example of the sort of things that you would on your web page structure. You always have a logo, you always have search. But if you put the content anchor right near your title, people will be able to jump past your logo, your search, your navigation, get straight to your content. I'd like to talk about images. Getting images right is probably the most important thing you can do. Does everyone know what an alt tag is? Well, it's actually not a tag, it's an attribute. Image is a tag, it's an element, but alt is an attribute. All images have an alt attribute. You may even choose to leave it empty, and there are conditions where you should leave it empty. You should leave an alt tag empty if it's your logo. It's not necessary to describe your logo. So here's an example. It's an image. I grabbed it from the paper. So it's Cadell Evans. They've got a bad alt tag. What they've done is they've just repeated the caption. Don't repeat the caption. What you need to do with the alt tag is you need to be able to describe that image very briefly to someone who cannot see that image. Just imagine you're yelling it to another portion of the house about a picture that you've seen. So something like this would probably satisfy that, but at least the person who comes across that will be able to read that or hear it read to them and understand what the image is. And in WordPress, you can do it very easily. So when you're uploading an image, right next to the title is a space for the alt tag. One thing you don't need to do is say, this is a picture of. For people who use screen readers, they know that they've come to a picture. Just describe the image. The second thing you need to know about images is if it's functional, you need to describe it. So things like go, search, comment, next, all of those buttons, you need to be able to describe. If you're using JavaScript and it's got a do post back, a person using a screen reader is not going to benefit from that. So you want to make sure you're using input, you want to make sure you're using button. And then if you have button and it says by me, they're going to hear that. They're going to know it's a button, they're going to hear that it's a button, and they're going to be able to activate that. If it's decorative, meaning it has no meaning, like a logo, well, a logo does have meaning, but you don't need to repeat that with every page. Put it in the background. The screen reader ignores what's in the background. It assumes that's the wall. So you're not going to bore your reader with reading out every image, but you'll at least have enough information for them to go with. If you're using spacer images, but if you still are using them, include an alt tag and leave it empty. So it will be ignored. You still get to use your spacer images. If something decorative does not convey any additional meaning to the user. So if you've got one of those satisfaction guaranteed or your money back images with a nice bit of clip art handshaking, you can leave that empty. As long as it's an empty alt tag, that's fine. Your text has conveyed that meaning. They don't need to hear a picture of two hands shaking. May the ghost of Clippy have mercy on you. So big thing to remember, always an alt tag. It's allowed to be empty. There's conditions at which it will be empty. But as much as you can, make sure you've given people who can't see those images something to go by. Text as image, we don't really need to do that anymore. There's lots of ways that you can use any font you like, well, many fonts that you like. You don't have to use the standard handful. You can get away with it if it's your logo. Try font substitution. There's a whole list of them out there. A lot that really work well. I've got Cipher at the bottom of the list because it hasn't been really well supported lately, and some of these others seem to work a lot better, a lot faster. And plus, Cipher is not going to work on some of those mobile devices. So if we have a quick look, here's the Guardian web page. As you can see, there's tons of text. There's lots of different fonts. And if I turn off the images, there isn't very much that goes away. The only thing that goes away are the pictures. The logo's gone. There's a little tiny image of clouds that have gone, but you can see all the navigation is still there. It's using a lot of different fonts, different sizes, different weights, different colors, different backgrounds, and you don't really need to use images in your important navigation areas. Avoid all caps. If you've ever heard a screen reader, it assumes that all caps, just like when you send someone a text in all caps, it looks like yelling. So it sounds like yelling to them. And some screen readers actually read it out as if it were an acronym. So it would read ALLCAPS instead of all caps. You also want to watch your font size. A number of people want manually increase the font size in their browser. So you want that to work. So you want to choose font sizes that scale. Use percentages and M's, etc. Don't use points or pixels because those are going to be more difficult to scale. And you want to scale your container with the content. Here's my local council, Merrickville, with its gorgeous website. As you can see, there are 7 navigation items near the top. So, bless you. So I've scaled it, and now we have 4 navigation items at the top. So now I've scaled it because I need to see. I forgot my glasses, and now I can't actually access half of the website. They are there. I've just selected everything. It's just they've flowed into the next line on a white background with white text, which is really easy to see. So you want to watch out for that. Don't rely on color alone to convey information. Everyone knows the London Tube map, but as soon as you take away that color, you lose a lot of information. So if you do things like, if you got are using traffic light signals to signify something, like maybe danger, alert, or good, use text as well. So next to the red button, use the word red or danger or whatever, so that there's a text basis to the information you're conveying. Color alone is not a good channel to, is not a good channel when it's the only channel to convey information. About 8 to 11% of males are colorblind. Women get to escape that. They're around about 1%. So if you want to exclude males, that might be one way to do it. A video, I could talk for about 2 hours about video, so I might grab a session to talk about video later. Video is a growing section, and I think it's important that you remember that video also includes blind people. People who cannot see also consume video. They'll consume it in different ways. They'll consume it with the text being read out to them. They'll consume it with closed captions. They'll consume it with a text transcript or audio descriptions. And audio descriptions basically cover what conversation doesn't. So if a character walks across the street, you'll hear the audio description. It's basically the narrator that conveys information that isn't in the dialogue. Yep, so we've already covered these alternate formats. Forms. I've actually been to a site where there was a feedback form that didn't work, and that's the first thing you should always check. You should check it regularly. If you haven't posted on your site recently, give yourself some feedback just to see how it works, because you'll be surprised. Occasionally it will break, and you'll have lost out on a good contact. So this is a nice form. It does have the asterisks, but you notice it also says required. So for a screen reader, they're going to hear full name required, email address required, and then they'll be able to type that in. Having the label refer to the text area and be before the text area is incredibly important. There's nothing worse than hearing a box and then having to move forward to hear what it's for and then having to come back. Also, when you have an error, it's important that when you refresh the screen, you bring focus to the first error. So when that person who has gone to the bottom of your page to fill in the form has an error, their focus is brought directly back to that part of the form and they don't have to move through the entire page again. Yep. Yep. Gravity Forms does a good job. It probably could do a little better, but it's one of the better ones out there, and it's worth the money. It's worth the money just as a plug-in, but it's worth the money because of that as well. Yeah, I sort of covered it, except for the two bits at the bottom here. Many people navigate websites using the keyboard, so they'll tab through. They may even just tab through to follow the links on the page. They may tab by headings. They may move by paragraphs or sections. So you want to test your website by using your keyboard. Put your mouse aside and see if you can move through your website. See if you can follow the links. See if you can follow the structure. Make sure it's a linear structure. Try and avoid CAPTCHA. There's lots of other ways. Does everyone know what CAPTCHA stands for? Good morning. It's a way to tell computers and humans apart so that you don't get spammed by machines. I'm not a big fan. If you've tried to fill this in, it's really annoying. What's the dot? Do I use the punctuation or not? Do I include the space or not? Now imagine you've got images off. So this is what you get. Not only is it not usable, it's not helpful in any way. So that person is not going to be able to post a comment to your well-crafted blog post. There's alternatives like text CAPTCHA, and all they do is give very simple statements that they were designed that a 7-year-old can answer them. And what it does is it avoids, it, for example, uses math but treats it as language. It uses some logic. Some of those are more difficult than others, but it spits them out at random. There's a great smashing article about the many other ways you can use CAPTCHA, or use something instead of those annoying CAPTCHAs that no one likes. Because remember, what we talked about at the beginning, you want people to come back, you want people to be, to feel welcomed, and you want everyone who comes to your website to not have a difficult time. So there's no point in being really welcoming and then putting up a barbed wire fence. If you've ever heard someone use a screen reader, if you use click here links and they're navigating by click here, they're not going to know anything about your site. They're going to have to painstakingly listen to every little bit that you've read. So instead, consider the link text and make a meaningful portion of that text your link, so that someone browsing through just hears polar bear disguises, reduce your verbosity, and then they'll be able to know what that's about instead of having to read all the fine print, in their mind, the fine print. It also massively helps SEO because there's a link with meaning going to something that makes sense that it's linking to. SEO doesn't really like click here because it sits among all the other click heres. Cool. I'm winding up nicely, so we've got some time for questions. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Access IQ. They just launched on Thursday, and it's a really, really excellent resource. Be kind to them because they've just launched. So I think the site keeps coming up and down. But there's one section in the search that's really useful. And what you can do is you can pose it a question, and it'll link you directly to the WCAG guideline that will help you through that. So if you're, and it also has a nice little filtering bit at the side so you can focus on one particular part. And if you just go to that page, it'll have the whole entire list. So it's not a bad little resource. And it's another place where a lot of inclusive design, universal design, accessible design people will be posting more free content. So just to recap, you want to check that your HTML is well formed. You want to see that if you were to turn CSS off, that it still reads in a linear, logical fashion. Because screen readers don't scan around the page. They tend to start at the beginning of your code and move through it. You want to always use correct alt tags for each image, whether it's empty, whether it's descriptive, whether it's brief. You want to avoid using text as an image. It's always better to use text. It's going to be more SEO friendly, and it's going to be more inclusive. Font size, colors, all of these things that you would normally think of in design, but when you're designing your site, when you're structuring your site, you want to think about who is coming and are you going to be welcoming to them or not. And forms especially, because you want comments, you want feedback. If you're selling online, you want to make sure that they can complete that selling process. So you might want to turn your screen off and see, can you move through your buying process? You're already familiar with it. You know how it's structured. Can you do it with your eyes closed? And there's lots of freebies. I think out of probably about 70 accessibility tools that I've used in the past couple of years, I've paid for one. There's lots and lots of free ones to use. Someone, so maybe even here, is giving a talk about Firebug later. It's a really handy one. Web Developer Toolbar is fabulous. It's on Chrome and Firefox. There's, I think, Web Accessibility Checker for IE, if you're a user of IE. There's other little ones like which one? Juicy Color Checker. So it'll take a look at your site and give you a quick view on how the contrast is working, whether the contrast is too high or too low. I've got lots of links. This is only a quarter complete, but if I'm very, over the next couple of days, come and see me, give me your card. I can send you a full set of links. I'll be writing up a page on that later. I'm also building a list of accessible and inclusive themes. If I can find an inclusive, responsive theme, I'll be really excited. But I don't think anyone's got one yet. And maybe that's a challenge that I'll throw out to some better developers than myself. But definitely come and see me if you want to talk about accessibility, inclusive design, or just basically making your WordPress a little bit friendlier. Any questions? Yes?
You mentioned you had a couple of examples of forms. How do forms go where the label is actually in the input fields? I'm assuming that
well, label is the element, and then there's an attribute called for. And if your for equals the same as the ID of your field, the label is understood to be the text label for that field. So if you got label for equals first name, and then the field is name and ID equals first name, then the label will refer to that field. So someone using assistive technology will understand that connection.
you wouldn't be able to have that in the actual field like
Oh, you mean like when you have JavaScript and you have the label inside the field?
We have just the field itself, and rather than having a separate label sort of sitting above it or
Hmm.
They just put the label using that value in the actual field itself. And
I generally don't like having the labels in the field. Now that's a personal opinion, but I also know people who fill in forms quickly using the tab key. So you're typing in, you're concentrating on that field, and you hit tab, and then you look in the field, and it's received focus, and the label is gone. There are ways to have the label not be visible to someone who's looking at it, but be audible to someone who's using a screen reader. So you can do things like hide them out 999 pixels to the left, that sort of thing. But it's still, you're doing something to hide what should be straightforward. Just put the label there. And it's also handy as well. People tend to like the label sitting above the field as opposed to the side, because it just makes it's a little bit more usable. Yes?
The screen readers see elements that are hidden with display on?
Yes and no. It depends how you've coded it and how you've wrapped it. There are ways to have elements available to screen readers that are out of the visual clutter of people who are looking. But again, you have to test. Different screen readers will see it differently.
With the use of sliders and slideshows and that kind of thing, particularly on home pages, how does that fare for assistive technology in terms of the jQuery and such?
It's kind of mixed. One that I like is Shadowbox.js. And the handy thing about that is that you can use the keyboard to move through it. So if you focus on the image, return as a link will bring up the slideshow. You can use the arrow keys to move through it, and you can use escape to get it out of the way. One of the issues, I mean, I've only covered maybe about 4 or 5 out of the 61 criteria, but another one is trapping the user. So one thing Shadowbox.js does well is not trap the user, because you can move out of it fairly easily.
Another example with scaling that you showed font sizes and so on. Is it wrong to assume, because I'm not sure what browser you've shown where it's a scale poorly, but I know some of the better browsers like Chrome and Firefox will scale the elements. If you try and zoom in, they'll scale the elements around to kind of keep all the relationships okay. Is it wrong to assume that people who are sort of visually impaired would speak out those browsers? Or do you have any anecdotal evidence?
Well, there's a mix. Ultimately, the reason people are scaling is they want to read. And those are the people you need to address. So some tools that they've used in their browser just scale the text. So the problem there was when the text was scaled, it moved into an area where there was no background. So that would possibly occur otherwise. There's a difference between zooming and scaling text. So they might not want to fill, they might, like, you know, my in-laws still have their little 14-inch screen. If they do that, they can't, they then have to move around the website in a very awkward fashion.
No, it's just something that's not always easy to do, especially if you're given a design. And it can be really difficult sometimes to...
Well, again, there's plugins you can throw at it.
Probably got time for one more question before the break. What's a good screen reader to try out? What you suggest and how to use it?
Thank you for mentioning that. I should have actually mentioned it earlier. There's a screen reader, Australian built, by a couple of guys. I can't remember where they are. Sorry?
Queensland.
It's in Queensland, thanks. Called NVDA. It's free. You can run it off a USB stick, so you don't actually need to install it, as opposed to JAWS, which is somewhere in the thousands. 4.5? 1.5. Yeah, and they're not exactly fast with upgrading it either. And as well, if you do use it for testing, I urge you to send them $10, $20, because they're completely self-funded and it's open source. But it's called NVDA, and you can run it off a USB stick. And it will be very fast because people with low vision are really accustomed to it. So I know many people who turn it up as fast as they can, but they still can't. So they hear, when you're sort of scanning, trying to look for words, they hear at that speed. So it's worth trying. One more? Yeah? All right, thanks very much. If you want to talk inclusive design.
Make sure you put those resources, those Stanford interactive maps and whatnot online as well.
Yeah, I'm going to add some links. Oh,
Good.
thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
I need that and a